Hey guys, it's me Miles, and this video is going to be a little bit different from the rest of them. It's going to be basically talking about the psychology behind a truther. Why do they believe what they believe, basically? Now, I have no psychology background whatsoever, but I do know someone who does.
Okay. Hi, I'm Dave, and I am a PhD psychology researcher. I've been invited here by Miles to explain some of the theory behind why people believe in conspiracy theories. Despite what you may think, people that believe in conspiracy theories aren't actually any more stupid or insane than the rest of us. For instance, there's no relationship between IQ and belief in conspiracy theories, nor do they show any especially delusional thinking that you might associate with kind of schizophrenia or with psychoses. Nevertheless, as you actually see from some of the videos, they seem to be trapped in what's called a kind of monological belief system. So a system where everything is conspiracy theory. So no matter what information they get, it all ends up being incorporated into this belief system where there's a giant conspiracy against them and the world. And the question is, why is this? As with anything in psychology, there's never one straight answer. There's a series of perspectives that kind of come together to form a coherent picture. But I'm going to go through some of the more consistent findings from the literature. Okay, so firstly, I'm now going to focus on kind of what personality traits or what individual characteristics make someone more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. First, as you might imagine, people who believe in conspiracy theories tend to be more mistrustful of other people, and particularly of higher authority.
I don't know, I don't trust these people that are in power. I don't, you know?
What's quite interesting is they also tend to have what's called an authoritarian personality, which means actually they were more willing to believe in and follow strong leaders. And they want things to be regimented, things to have like an order, and also tend to blame other people for their problems. And this will come into focus a little bit later. Perhaps the most consistent finding, though, across many studies, is the effects of locus of control and a sense of powerlessness. So locus of control is how much you think your life is in your own destiny. For example, let's say you were late for work one day. Someone who has a high internal locus of control would maybe think that it was their own fault for pressing the snooze button one too many times, for waiting to have a piece of toast rather than grabbing, say, a breakfast bar, and they didn't account for the traffic. Whereas someone with an external locus of control would blame other people's driving for causing the traffic, would say it was the alarm clock's fault for not waking them up in time, and so on and so forth. So they externalise the causes of anything that happens to them. What this kind of leaves people with fundamentally is a kind of a sense of powerlessness when anything serious happens, because as far as they're concerned, they're not in control of their own lives. And of course, 9/11 was an incredibly dramatic, emotional and serious event. So you can see how, if you already had this externalised view of the world that you had no control of it, when a truly terrifying event happens, it generates a high level of anxiety. And this anxiety then gets manifested in this kind of belief in conspiracy theories. As one researcher put it, conspiracy theories are a convenient alternative to an uncertain world. So I mentioned powerlessness specifically. So how do we know this? Well, firstly, of course, we can count and correlate. So we take personality measures of, say, powerlessness and feelings of locus of control, and we relate this to how willing people are to believe in their conspiracy theories. But more interesting was a fascinating little experiment that involved priming. And priming is essentially where you get someone to think about something before taking part in an experiment. In this case, the researchers got participants to think about the global economic situation. So nothing to do with conspiracy theories as such. They got them to think about how they have no control over kind of the money markets, about investment, about what huge multinationals do, i.e. that they are powerless to control their own lives. And lo and behold, when people were asked do they believe in conspiracy theories, they were more likely to in the condition when they were asked to feel powerless, when they were asked to imagine an uncertain and chaotic world. What we can say really here is, although people that simply, everyone has a different level of locus of control and a sense of powerlessness, and this can also come from, legitimate circumstances. So if you're particularly poor, if you have had a bad life, you are legitimately powerless. What it seems to be is these kind of people that both are, as a characteristic of themselves, have this external locus of control, and feel situationally that they are powerless, are drawn to conspiracy theories as an explanation. As I say, for someone who has high anxiety about they're not in control of their life, believing in an all-powerful shadow government is a convenient alternative to thinking this was a terrifying event that no one could have predicted. Okay, so the second thing we're going to look at is kind of the more cognitive approach. What is it about their thinking style that makes one more likely to believe in conspiracy theories? And one thing is how we attribute cause to an event. So humans, we tend to ascribe things in one of two ways, either situational, so based on the context, or what's called dispositional, which is based on kind of broad character sweeps. For example, let's say your friend Kevin crashes his car. You might ascribe to that situation that he was tired, that the weather conditions were bad, that the brakes on his car were failing. So you'd give kind of this complex situational reason as to why an event occurred. Alternatively, and interestingly, if it was a stranger that hit Kevin, you're likely to say that person was a terrible driver, or words to that effect. And what this is called is a fundamental attribution error. And this is our tendency to attribute causes of action to this kind of generalised dispositional trend rather than focusing on the context. And why? Well, focusing on the situation, the context, is basically quite hard. So we tend not to do it. Well, how does this relate to conspiracy theory specifically? So take an example from 7/7 rather than 9/11. Although there are examples of 9/11 when this comes into play. So main conspiracy theory is based on a report from a woman who said that it felt as if the tube train, so the underground train, lifted off the tracks. And they were taking this to say, well, that's evidence for conspiracy theory. It wasn't a suicide bomb, it was an MI5 planted bomb or whatever. And this is dispositional thinking. There's a conspiracy, so what she said is related to that conspiracy. Whereas a situational look at that event would say, well, here's a survivor, a victim, who was caught in this explosion, who moments ago almost lost her life in a tiny tube filled with smoke and flame. What is to say that her eyewitness testimony is at all accurate? And that would be a situational explanation, but that takes looking at kind of the minutiae, rather than saying it's conspiracy theory. Is basically simple. And when psychologists have looked at this kind of attribution error, we find that firstly, we always tend towards dispositional because it's easier essentially, and it's especially true when we're in a hurry or when we have, for instance, high emotion, for instance, anxiety and fear. So you can see, related to what I said previously about personality, if you have individuals that are particularly fearful or anxious, they're suddenly more likely to make sweeping generalisations and see all hosts of different sporadic individual events as part of this one whole disposition, so it's a conspiracy, rather than see each in turn. And we saw a little bit of this when people were discussing how the buildings fell down. So everyone's got their own ideas and they all link together, so Building 7, the two towers and stuff. However, they can see that because it's saying it's a conspiracy is easier. Whereas looking at it independently, so, fire, melting point of steel, the structure of the building, debris that fell away, is complicated and takes essentially effort. And the problem is that once we are caught in this dispositional mode of thinking, it's actually quite hard to switch back. The second thing I want to look at is called the confirmation bias. And to say that conspiracy theorists use the confirmation bias is a bit like saying that a nuclear weapon makes a bit of a mess when it goes off. And for those that don't know, the confirmation bias is the tendency to attend to information that agrees with us and ignore information that disagrees with us. And clearly we can see this in these conspiracy theory videos and these beliefs. Is, no matter what evidence they're presented with, they very quickly dismiss or ignore or pretend they haven't seen evidence that's contrary to their opinion, and focus on tiny little details that no one else who is kind of thinking more critically would say, well, that's just, coincidence or bad timing.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, New York was the 11th colonized State of the Union?
I don't know, sorry, my American history is very bad.
It happened 111 days before the end of the year, hit first by Flight 11, the Pentagon, 77 feet tall, hit by Flight 77.
Okay, so the last thing I'm going to go very briefly into is kind of the social identity aspect of conspiratorial beliefs. Because obviously these people aren't alone, partly thanks to the internet. You can connect with thousands, hundreds, possibly, hopefully not, millions of people that believe the same thing as you. So the question is, you've got these people that are scared, that have are making these cognitive biases that we all do, but have drove them toward conspiracy theories. But even then, you think you'd be able to convince some people. And indeed, if there was a very good documentary about conspiracy theories on BBC recently that showed some people can be convinced. So what separates those that can be convinced by basically pure evidence from those that will refuse to admit that they're wrong or they've got things wrong or that anything might simply be not as they say? And one explanation for this is related to what's called social identity theory. And this is the idea that we all have identities that we cling to that our self-esteem depends on. So, for instance, I'm a researcher, a psychologist, a son, a twin, a brother. People can't, mothers, fathers, office workers, your job, the sport you like, the games you play, the clubs you're a part of. These all form different identities that become part of us. So what you have to realise is that when Miles was in New York challenging these people. He wasn't having an academic debate with them as such. It wasn't a case where I have information, you have information, and then we'll see who's right, and then we'll change, our conclusions will be based on this, and I might change my opinion. You're essentially attacking someone's identity. They are a conspiracy theorist, they're a truther. They believe that there's a shadow government involved in, one of the greatest terrorist attacks in history.
I would much rather believe that there were terrorists behind it. It's very uncomfortable to know that the government or elements within the government or the shadow government, whoever was behind it, did this. Okay, and we know.
And you're not going to convince them by giving them evidence because you're basically attacking who they are, just not what they believe. And this is one of the missing things in conspiracy research is once you're in a community, you're in a community, and whenever you get a group that has this kind of monological belief, it simply gets more and more extreme. So inconsistencies in the argument are weeded out, people that don't believe stuff are weeded out, and it's really hard then to go against the grain. It's hard to go say, well, I don't believe this anymore, this isn't true, I've been convinced, because you're surrounded by people that believe differently. Possibly nearly, I'd say almost 100 years of psychology research into the effects of group behaviour has constantly showed how, we conform to those around us, what our friends believe, what wider society believes. And if you're in this monological belief system, you're not going to change it. And there's also a point when it comes to self-esteem, which I don't want to say this is a main point, because it's unfairly labelling a lot of these truthers who are genuine individuals that believe something happened. But as well as completing conspiracy theories being a convenient alternative to an uncertain world, it is also a convenient alternative to blind hate. So, for instance, one of the conspiracy theories, I'm not sure how popular is it now in the community, was about Jews in the Twin Towers getting calls from Mossad saying, "Don't come in today." And you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to work out what pre-existing prejudice is based on. So we always have to be careful that while many conspiracy theorists obviously just believe in the shadow government, there's also some people that are using it to enhance their own prejudice or sense of insecurity. And the reason conspiracy theory is useful for this is because in our modern world you can't simply admit you're anti-Semitic or racist or whatever, but if you transfer that and say, I'm not being anti-Semitic, but here's the evidence that Mossad was involved in this, you have a legitimate, if you like, way of expressing your prejudice. And again, I don't want to say this too heavily because it would unfairly bias you, I suppose, against conspiracy theories in general, because they don't all believe this. Most of them are genuine people that believe in the truth. But it is an important point to consider whenever you hear people speaking, that behind a number of conspiracy theories there may be underlying prejudices and other mistrust. Okay, there is one last point about the social aspect that I think is quite important. And this is related to the idea of being trapped in this monological belief system. And this is that if you believe in one conspiracy theory, you're more likely to believe in all of them.
And myself, possibly, that could have been killed by these murdering maniacs in power who continue power and give puppets like Mitt Romney and Obama a chance at the Oval Office, so long as they do their bidding. They probably say, don't forget JFK, don't forget RFK,
Sorry,
or MLK.
You've lost me there. What does JFK have to do with...
JFK was a president that had press releases with a press standing, intelligent guy who wanted to get off the Federal Reserve, and he was shot. And obviously, you look at this Zapruder film, the criminal bullet came from the front because his head is knocked backwards, but they make it look like Oswald did it from behind.
Okay.
But there was two bums, shooters on the grassy knoll, and Nixon and Bush were CIA operatives, hitmen at that time in Texas, and they might have been the guys that were actually offed him so that they get a shot at the Oval Office, White House. That's my idea on it. I don't know. It seems if you put two and two together and line up the ducks, you can see where they lead.
That's a whole different ball of wax. The way I don't believe Oswald was the lone person. He was a patsy. The ones on that plane, I consider them
Lee Harvey Oswald, the aggressor.
The lone gunman, sure. I don't believe that either.
Really? Oh.
I mean, I don't know if you've read any of the books on
Not
it,
very much,
but
unfortunately.
I've seen film of the One thing in particular, the president always traveled with Secret Service from Washington, his own private detail. Well, that detail was called off that day. He was being protected by Texas Secret Service. They have film of the Secret Serviceman on his car getting off just before the shots rang out. Literally getting off the car. I mean, these are things I look at and I say, questions. I have no answers, but they have questions for me that have never been answered.
And often hold contrary views. So, for instance, I talked about self-esteem maintenance. And if you see the conspiracy theory kind of community, often now people are quite vague about this. Why? Because in the conspiracy theory there's lots of different ideas. So I think is it Flight 51, the one that crashed in Pennsylvania? Some people say that was shot down, some people say it never crashed to begin with and the crash was faked. So how can these people be in a community at the same time? Well, they simply ignore it. They have a certain level of cognitive dissonance. This is where you can believe two things at the same time to help them maintain this community and thus their self-esteem. A good example of this was a great piece of research that asked participants who believe in conspiracy theories lots of different alternative views of conspiracy. So, for instance, Bin Laden is alive and well and still alive, alive and well living in Pakistan or whatever, or that he actually died in 2000 and used the scapegoat. And people that believed that he was a scapegoat, who was already dead at the time of 9/11, also believed he was still alive. And this is because they weren't focusing on the specific belief as such, but actually were just in this generalised kind of cognitive bubble of it's a conspiracy, and therefore anything made sense as long as it fitted within their conspiracy framework. Okay, so that's a very brief introduction to the psychology, if you like, of conspiracy theorists. Obviously it's not an extensive list and it's far more complicated than I'm necessarily meaning now, but these seem to be the main points. So from an individual characteristics point of view, individuals who believe conspiracy theories tend to have this external locus of control and also tend to feel more powerless, either just as an internal feeling or may actually be in a position that they are actually more powerless than other people. From a cognitive approach, so kind of critical thinking skills, they're making two fundamental errors. First is this attribution error, so they're tending to assign dispositional causes that are kind of easy to explain versus situational causes which are harder to explain. And they're also showing quite considerable confirmation bias. So this is where, as I say, you simply ignore all evidence to the contrary of your own personal opinion. And lastly, in terms of kind of social, the idea here is that because the conspiracy theory is part of their identity, they're a truth of fighting an uncaring, unfeeling government, that any attack on the evidence of conspiracy theory isn't just an attack on their kind of research model, it's an attack on them themselves, it's an attack on their identity, you're attacking them as a person. And that this is quite powerful in keeping people within that community. And there's one final point I'd like to make. So we can laugh at these people, we do in these videos, let's say, they're meant to point out the flaws, should we say, in their thinking. But are they basically harmless? And the problem is, the answer is no. Possibly the main problem is, well, yes, if you believe in conspiracy theories, you're more likely to believe a novel one, and this obviously conforms to this idea that they're trapped in this kind of cognitive bubble where everything is a conspiracy. But perhaps more importantly, one of the greatest predictors of belief in conspiracy theory is simple exposure. So if you've been exposed to people talking about conspiracy theories, you're more likely to believe one yourself when it's offered to you about an important or terrifying event. And this is actually quite important because it relates to really important issues of today, such as climate change and global warming, kind of green energy, this whole it's a hoax caused by scientists, and things such as kind of vaccinations, so kind of MMR, AIDS treatments. Just being exposed to other people's conspiracy theories is more likely to make you doubt the accepted wisdom on all these types of events. So in that case, these people that want the truth, that talk about shadow governments and not being told, the truth by politicians, they're not simply harmless cranks or well-meaning individuals. They are, even if they're inadvertently doing it, potentially harming quite a lot of people.
Right, so that's the end of that one. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and I want to say thank you to my friend Dave for actually making it. He spent a lot of time recording this and a lot of time doing the research for me, for us. So, yeah, thanks mate, I owe you a pint next time I see you. Anyway, right, so this is the end, but it's not actually the end of this 9/11 series. I know in my last video I said this was going to be the last video, but sorry guys, there's going to be one more, but it's only going to be a small one. And then that's it. I'm going to go back to doing awesome experiments. So anyway, I will see you guys when I see you next. Bye.